Good day, creative spirit, and welcome. We'll start our session today for Advent 2, Peace Sunday. Hymn number 44 in Voices United, It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. It came upon the midnight clear, that glorious song of old, from angels bending near the earth to touch the harps of gold. Peace on the earth, goodwill to all, and from heaven's our gracious King. The world in solemn stillness lay to hear the angels sing. Still through the cloven skies they come, with peaceful wings unfurled, and still their heavenly music floats o'er all the weary world. Above its sad and lonely plain, they bend on heaven ring, and ever o'er its labors sound the blessed angels sing. Yet with the wars of sin and strife, the world has suffered long. Beneath the angels' strain have rolled 2,000 years of wrong, and knowing humankind hears not the love song which they bring. Oh, hush the noise and cease your strife to hear the angels sing. For lo, the days are hastening on, my prophets seen of old, when with the ever-encircling years shall come the time foretold, when peace shall overall the earth, its ancient splendors fade. The whole world will send back the song which now the angels sing. I think I'm losing my voice. All right, and let's start with the reading then. I would like to do the reading for our Candle of Peace, our Advent 2 candle. Wow, God, in spite of all the peace on earth signs and greetings, it is really hard to find your peace around us right now. We can be as much the cause as the result of frayed tempers and little patience. Help us to cut through the distractions and see your peace in small actions and gentle words. Help us to be the ones sharing small actions and gentle words. Be patient with us as we work on our intention to see you and to be your peace on earth. And I will now light our second candle. Let us be the peace on earth. And now for more voices, number 220. I admittedly forgot to do this last week. So this is 220. Hope shines as the solitary star. So we'll do the first two verses, and I will have the lyrics for you on the screen.
Peace shines as the solitary star. Faith is the inner light. You and I together mirror the light of light and illumine the pathway home.
And just before we head into our creative time, our intentional prayer practice, I'd like you to join me in a prayer. It's a responsive prayer, so there will be at the bottom of your screen the response. Let us pray. Creator God, help us to see your peace in the ritual of a new sunrise every morning and the stars every evening. Help us to feel your peace in the sureness of gravity and air and water. Help us to notice you in all these things. And together we say, help us to live this day intentionally with you. Christ, give us your peace as we interact with our family and our neighbors. Help us to be your peace, to practice seeing the dignity of every living being without exception. Help us to live this day intentionally with you. Spirit, give us the energy to work for your peace in our homes, our neighborhoods, and in the world. Help us to work for justice and kindness and peace. Help us to live this day intentionally with you. Amen. And now, as we engage our intentional time of our spiritual practice, we are going to paint. That is what we are going to do. So you have watercolor. I'm dealing with blues and purples and cool greens and maybe a little cool yellow. But these are the inspiration pieces for today. All right, so those are the inspiration pieces. And we'll start with this one. Because this one is, I think, really it's a lot of fun. So is this one, but I think that this one you're going to just have a little bit of a different appreciation for. So the things that you will need today are, you'll need at least one sheet of 9x12 watercolor paper, cut in two, all right. You may need a second full 9x12, that depends on whether you decide to do this, but start with one sheet. Some cardstock, if you happen to have cardstock on hand. Of course, your watercolor paint in a palette. I'm just using the tube watercolor. If you've got pencils at home, that's fine. If you've got the pans, great. And if you've got liquid, wonderful. A glue stick, or I find the glue stick works really well for this, but if you don't have the glue stick, then certainly just white glue will do. A little white acrylic paint you might find helpful. Of course, some jars of water, dirty and clean jar, your rag, scissors, 2 paintbrushes. So I'm just going with a round brush and a flat brush, okay? And a fine and ultra fine black Sharpie if you happen to have them. And if you happen to have metallic markers, that'll do as well. You might find a need in this piece for a pencil. So if you have a pencil and maybe an eraser. I said the E word. Possibly some painter's tape or masking tape. Fun things that you will likely need, and that is some salt. Now this is the sea salt, is a little bit of a coarser grain, but if you've just got table salt at home, that's fine. A little chunk of bubble wrap, And of course, and I made sure not to fold it this week. So you don't have to sit and wait for me to unfold it from last week. Some small pieces of saran wrap, if you happen to have those as well. So again, here is our art for today, our creative, our spiritual practice of creativity. This is the art that we'll be creating. And it's in blues, and I know that Advent is in blue, and that wasn't really the intent in this particular case. Oftentimes it is. But choosing the blues and the purples this week really has more to do about peace. And that is that those are common colors. As this Sunday is peace, this is why we are choosing these particular colors, because they are calming, right? That's why the people find the ocean calm, and it's the blues, it's the greens, it's the turquoises. What you will need to start with, so we'll start with our first piece of, so this is a half sheet of the 9 by 12, right? There we go, cut in half, just like that. Okay, what you want to do is we're going to use sort of as many techniques as we can come up with today. So it's kind of a fun, we get a lot of time to relax, and in that moment, or in this time of sacred time, sacred space, to be aware, right? We've talked about the intention, that this is an Advent of intention. So we are going to, with great intent, be fully aware of your brush strokes, aware of how the paper looks when you add water to it, how the paint moves on it, how the paintbrush feels. This is as much about being in the moment as possible, and that is about then your Advent of intention and your intentional Advent. So I'm not going to tape it down because I don't want the edges, right? This piece, you'll notice, now you could do your strips this way. These are individual strips, okay, that are of different techniques that are just glued then on top of one another. So this will give you the most options as far as different techniques to do and the width of them. This way they'll be thinner, you may not have as many options, so that's up to you. But then you could potentially choose the sections that you prefer, because this would be then wider than your finished piece. Okay, so I'm going to work with it in this way. And I'm going to add some water. So I'm not taping it down again, right? Because I want to work right on over. So be aware that whatever surface you happen to be working on, you're going to get paint on the edges of it. Okay. And again, this doesn't necessarily have to be super soupy oopy. What I'm going to start with, so I've got my paints already, and remember if whatever side your dominant hand is on is the side that you want your water, your paint, and your rag, okay, on your dominant side. So I am going to start with, let's see, I always like to start with some blue. So I've just made sure I had some water in my brush, and then dipping the brush in the paint. And then I'm just going to, and of course I added the water to the paper, right? So you're going to see that move. I'm just sort of creating areas. I'm just kind of letting it do its thing. And then rinse. Take off a little of the excess water on your jar, right? Just move this into frame here for you. A little of the excess, and then of course just the excess on my rag. Yeah, I know. And then you take a little extra water. Artists, there's not necessarily always a reason. And then I'm just going to go in between, and I'm going to add a little purple happening here. And this process, right, this is, again, this is a good time. You don't necessarily have to chit chat. Now, if you're working on your own, that's great. But sometimes try and refrain from the extra chit chat. Play your music that calms you. If you've got favorite Christmas carols, this is a wonderful time because this, again, we are preparing our hearts and minds for the arrival of Christ, right? That's part of the intention is the preparation. Okay, so there's one section. Now I'm going to, because it's a little wet, I'm going to throw some salt down in it. And in particular, I'm going to throw the salt, you can tell which are the most wet. And then because I haven't got the paper taped down, you'll notice how it's buckling a bit and curling. So the places with the most water generally are going to be the valleys at this point, right? But you can take, if you look at it from the side, you can sort of see where a lot of those really wet spots. So I'm just going to add some salt into those really wet spots and let that happen on its own. Okay, the next section, I am going to, let's see, I think I'm going to do some purple. So a little water, fill my brush up, and you know what, and I'm just going to go straight across right up to those line, that previous line, and it's a little dark, so let me just get some clean water. Now I'm going to take a square, a little hunk of bubble wrap, okay, and I am just going to just lay it down and give a little tap so that all of those bubbles come in contact, and then I'm going to lift it up, and you'll see, and then I'm going to wipe off and you'll see there's too much water here at the moment. So, because the bubbles, the circles are disappearing. So let's try again. Aha! And there, they did not. So it had a little time to dry. So I'm just gonna put it back over on this section. Ooh. And let's see if there's anything in there. It's probably too dry now. It's a funny thing. You just got to kind of work it and see what happens. I bet if I had made that a bit darker with less water, but nevertheless, you have the texture, right? You have the bubble wrap texture, this is what this is about. This is because we're creating, you want to create things that have different levels of technique and texture, right? Okay, so there's one. Saran, well, we have to do the saran because the saran is just so much darn fun. And because I already have it unfolded, and you're not going to have to sit through me trying to unfold it this week. That in itself should be reason, right? That totally should be reason enough to use the saran wrap this week. Okay. You know, if you ever find a situation where you have painted somewhere that you didn't want, or it's too much color in a space, if you rinse your brush out from whatever color you've been using, dab it off, and then if you take your brush against where there might be pooling that you don't want, and rinse out your brush again, you'll notice that it lifts that paint, right? Look at that. It just lifts, and you can give it a little bit of a roll, and it would just lift that right on out of there. Is this right? Okay. Now, this may or may not be dry enough at this, or wet enough at this point, but I'm just sort of putting in some saran, just like that, and let it be. Now, let's do one more really, really flowy, watery funness. Okay, so I'm going to use my wide brush here. %, satisfied, or if you feel that you have um, too much water on your paper or too much paint pooling, you can always take a little dab, a little piece of paper towel, or even again the rag, right? The rag would certainly work. And I'm just going to, and this adds, depending on how your paper towel, and I see because I had it on the edge like that, adds its own little texture sort of thing. And then when you dab it like that, there, it's very understated and muted. Yes, ooh, ah, right, okay. So now that masterpiece you can set aside to dry. And the salt, you're really going to want, now you can dry the others, you can speed the others up with a hair dryer. Yes, the salt, I have to admit, does not have quite the same effect if you speed it up with a hair dryer. Let it do its thing. That may take some time. But again, you can, I'll show you in another piece what the hair dryer looks like once it's done with the hair dryer. But just set that aside. All right. And then you're going to want to take your second piece. And this, we are going to then create this top portion. So that, this top portion is actually on your other sheet of paper, okay? And again, much like you did before, you can decide whether you want darker skies, like maybe you want to start with some black instead, actually. So I'm just taking my flat brush and I'm adding water. And depending on where you want sort of your horizon, if you will, depends on how far down you're going to want to take that paint, right? So at least halfway, you know, past a little bit of a third, so that when you add your first layer of ground here, that it will be covering up the edge. So when you're happy with it, and it's not always easy to know. Don't be too hard on yourself, because that's not always an easy process to know exactly when to be happy with it, right? And again, you can, some of those really wet spots, go ahead and add a little salt. Just because it's fun. Sometimes it's easier too, just to put it in the palm of your hand, and then you can sprinkle it in. And not over the whole thing, just in, you know, in a few of those wetter, more wet spots. And not everywhere, Carolyn, as she continues to sprinkle it on. I know, it's hard to resist. Sometimes it is just the fun and the play in allowing your creativity to go. Sometimes that happens. So again, now you have to let that dry. But while that is drying, there are still other things that you can be doing. So now we mentioned about using hearts, and that was my own personal, right? If I include a heart every week, then that reminds me that I am in preparation. I'm preparing my heart, my mind, right? I'm trying to be as attentive and aware as possible while we are in this intentional Advent. And so I have included as sort of a moon kind of thing, if you will, a heart shape instead. And so I had an extra square of watercolor paper laying around, and I just went ahead with some yellow. Now you could have done it with a really light blue, and that would have given you stuck to that palette, but I did admittedly want it to sort of do a little pop. So once I painted that, then I just flipped it over, and you notice that it's not all the way to the edges, and that it is, in some places, it's got a little orange or whatever. And then I just lightly drew any heart shape on the back. And I didn't worry about tracing. It wasn't about being a perfect heart, right? Just went ahead and much like that. And then and cut it out. And what you get is what you get, because that's part of the fun. And then, so that's one thing that you can be doing right now as well. When the other pieces are dry, so when your background is dry, then go ahead and brush off the salt. And this, so I was saying about the salt, that this didn't leave as much of a, what it does is sort of give it a star type pattern or a snowflake. It absorbs all the color and the extra water around the salt, right? When you dry it with a hair dryer, it doesn't fully give it that time to do all of that absorption. It ends up drying the paint with the hair dryer instead of allowing the salt to pull it all in. So it doesn't have quite the same effect, but it does still have an effect. You do get some texture happening in there. And you have the top half, right? So we're gonna sit that down, and then you are going to do your layers. Now you already know that if you did your various textured sections in portrait, so when the paper's upright like this, when it's longer, the tall is longer, then the side is shorter. This is portrait, like a portrait that hangs on the wall. This is landscape, like you're looking at a big open field, right? That's landscape. So if you painted your sections in portrait, then you already know, provided of course that I cut these pages equal. I should have mentioned that, shouldn't I? Yeah, that would have helped, Carolyn. Luckily, by the looks of things, yes, I did. If you're not sure, if you didn't actually use I used a cutting board, so that made a difference. If you do not have a cutting board and you were only eyeballing exactly, you may want to do your textured sections this way on the paper so that when you cut them, you are guaranteed and you can place them, wherever you may need to. So there's a thought. All right, so I have my piece there, and now I'm going to want to cut. And you'll notice that I tried to sort of stagger a lighter with a darker, with a bit of a lighter with a darker, all right, just to give it some contrast. So I went with the lightest one as being the first one. So in this particular case, it could go either way. I mean, this texture I find is much like the texture that's already there. So I think I'm going to go with then the Saran Wrap, okay? And you can do this as sort of a sweeping, it doesn't have to go straight across. You could think of a hill, right? Hills. So sweeping this way. Like it. I'm not worrying about, you notice that there's some purple, right? Because we cut it off of the other piece that had the purple. I'm not going to worry about that because there's going to be something over top of it. So I think, or maybe I'll even move it up a bit. Yeah. Now you don't have to start gluing yet. You can let that sit, and then go with your next piece, and then decide. but what I will likely do is take that other piece that I cut out and not necessarily add it back in, because I like the angle there. There's going to be some shading that we're going to do later. But you can always do it like that. Glue it in and then cut it. I would actually, once you're done deciding where you want all your pieces, I would glue that in. Don't try and cut it first. Glue it in so that you know that it's the shape or whatever. Glue it just like that. And then at the very end, you can flip it over from the back side, right? And then cut off whatever happens to be sticking out. That's a whole lot easier. Believe me. All right. So once you just, yeah, I know you can't believe that you're having to sit here and watch me glue things, but I will just do this quickly. In fact, I won't go ahead and I won't do the whole thing, but let's see, we're gonna glue this wherever I happen to be liking it. That's good. Line the edges up as much as possible. Okay, now, if you have an extra piece of paper or cardstock or just whatever from the recycle bin, I have found that if you lay this on over top, and this allows then you to run your fingers across it as opposed to running your fingers across the watercolor. Because if you press really hard, you're going to end up with watercolor rubbing off onto your hands, and you don't want that to happen, right? So you just give that a good, and that just allows you to press down really hard. That's great. So you would continue to do all those other layers, however you so choose, right? The next thing then that you would want to do once you have all your layers down, of course, is the ever so fun splatter. Yes, that's the word. Thank you. I heard you out there. The splatter. Now you could technically do the splatter beforehand if you wanted. That's fine. The splatter, yeah, maybe beforehand might actually be a good idea. That's fine. However you happen, there's no wrong. And then when you have your little star, I know that some of you talked about stars being more in a line for you because it is about following the Bethlehem star. But for me, like I say, the heart reminding me to be in the moment, to keep that attentiveness, right, as the intention of the preparation for Advent, or for the birth of Jesus. So the other thing then you want to do, now this is optional. You can leave it and not have any acknowledgement that it is peace. You know that it is. You could write the name of it down on the bottom if you wanted. I just took a little hunk of cardstock and wrote on it peace. And then I took a metallic marker, right, either gold or silver, and I just, around the edge, I just went ahead and gave it a little edging. Nothing, it's not hugely obvious, but it just adds a little something right along the edge of the paper. So some of it's, there's not a big wide frame on it. And then you can decide where it goes, right? And that's why in this piece, I haven't stuck it in yet because I wasn't 100% sure fully where I wanted it. But at the time, I did happen to like it sitting in there. So I've just stuck it in there. And that is your piece. It feels good, right? That's relaxing. So that's how that one goes. Oh, I forgot. Oh my goodness. So once you're done, before you've added your piece, before you add your piece, there's a little shadowing and shading that you can do that just helps the piece along. And you'll notice that in between all of these sections, I mean, along the edge, there's a faint dark gray line, and then even around the heart or around your moon kind of thing. If you take a little black watercolor, right, and it doesn't have to be super dark, you'll find that you'll know whether it's too light or too dark. Remember too that watercolor dries lighter than when it is applied, right? And you can just go ahead, go right along the edge, right along, and do that for all the edges, and then even around, and that just adds a little depth to it. It just helps the depth of it as if those were actually hills and that the moon was casting a shadow on them from one hill to the next. All right. Okay. Now, if you want to do a second piece, because gosh darn it, that is fun. The other piece is a bit easier. Notice I didn't tell you that before. So if you've been painting along, well then, I shouldn't say that it's necessarily easier. There are not as many painting techniques necessarily involved, but that doesn't necessarily make it any, I shouldn't say specifically easier. So you've got another, oh, I forgot to put my piece back in there. Let me just put my little piece right back on in there. Can't be without piece. All right. The other, so this was the other one. And you'll notice, it's very plain to see, that I sort of by sight went ahead and created these boxes. The tape for the size of paper, if you're going to use the painter's tape in between them, it's too wide, right? Like it's a really wide strip. Now, unless you had plans for that strip, that's fine. But I think if you were to leave that strip white for this size of card, it's going to be too wide. Now you can cut the tape down. It's tricky, but it is possible. Particularly if you have an X-Acto knife, a self-healing mat like this, and a metal ruler, you can actually cut the tape down fairly easily like that. But otherwise with scissors, it really is a bit of a nuisance. What I like about the fact that these boxes are as rough is just that it gives it some fact that this was homemade. This was made by me, and it was not just stamped out, by some manufacturer somewhere. So that's a good thing. And how you go about it, and you have that option. I'll just show you on a scrap piece of paper. Well, actually, I'll just use the back of this. You have the option of how you want to, so before you start painting, how might you want your 3 sections? And again, do them 3 sections for the full width of the card, assuming that you're going to be working landscape, right? Go ahead and do them even though you're going to be covering part of it up, go ahead and create those boxes. Now, with pencil, though you're not going to see my pencil, you would lightly, if you're concerned, you can lightly mark, where sort of give yourself a little guideline, even if it's maybe just the little corners, with the marker. I'm not suggesting that you do this in marker. Remember, this would be pencil, but this is just easier to see. You can give yourself a little mark in the corners, right, of approximately, and I'm just eyeballing, obviously. There's one there, about the same. Make that one and that one. So the middle one, obviously, is going to be much thinner because, so right, that would, then when I paint, it would end up being about like this, and this, and this. Okay. So even these aren't exact. That's okay. You could do it with you know, you could go ahead and do exactly, so here's your paper. You could have your panels, a much skinnier panel in the center with then the wider panel out on either side. You could do, there's your paper, you know, the three, watch, let me see if I get this relatively even. Not so much. Say those are even. They're relatively even panels. Maybe you want to do, say this was your paper, do the big panel, a larger panel in the center, and then skinnier panels, right? Doesn't have to be three the same. So there's some options for you, okay? Whatever you happen to like. And you don't even have to do it in pencil. So you have the option, if you're allowing yourself to the freedom, right? Let yourself go, and take just some water and your round brush, and go ahead and give yourself, you're eyeballing at this point how much of an edge you want. And I'm just creating a box. Now you're saying, I can't see this. If you're sitting, depending on where the light is, right, you're just creating a simple box. And you can actually see it in the light. And then just, or, now there's a little bit of blue, there's actually obviously a little bit of blue in my brush. If you put a hair of paint in that, you could actually just do a light wash, and then that would help give you an idea of where it actually is, right? Right, just like that. And then it would be the same techniques as before, adding, or however, whatever techniques you would like. If you have a favorite technique from this piece, right, either the just letting the water move and puddle and pool, or maybe you like the, maybe you really love the bubble technique, you could do that. Maybe the salt technique is a favorite. Then whatever you would like, you could do the one technique in all three, or you could change it up. That is up to you. But again, do your panels. Now this, I have to admit, I wondered, because I wasn't honestly sure, I took a piece of paper. Just took a good old regular piece of papier, took my scissors, cut myself again, because this was what I was, you know, these hearts are here for me. I went ahead and I just cut out a heart in regular old paper. And while the paint was wet, I went ahead and stuck it down to see what would happen. Now, here's the heart. So when I pulled it off, you'll see that not all of the paint was wet enough for it, right? So it was down like this, and I just, again, I put a piece of paper on over top and I just kind of stuck it down. Hope for the best. When I lifted it up, it was only partially there. And I thought, well, it's kind of like, this is like my moon. But I wanted more of an obvious heart shape. So with the really watered down, you could use the white, if you've got white watercolor paint, you can use white. I just watered down the acrylic paint because I had been splattering anyway. And then just did a light little outline just to give it more shape to it. But that's how that worked. So here's a copy of, so here we've got the heart here. Now let's see, lift that up. Oh, again, it's just a little bit lighter, so I would go ahead and I would probably outline that with the acrylic. And this has still got the salt on it, so I would just go ahead and give that a little rub. Some of the salt's going to be harder to get off in some places than others. And so I just sort of gently use a fingernail. All right. And you may get some, you'll see that my fingers are starting to get a little bit of paint on it. Don't be surprised. Yeah. Now, if you want a certain effect, you could leave the salt on it, just as starry. And if you have glitter, because I know some of you do, skies are a lot of fun for glitter. All right, so there's the 3 panels. Then a piece of your cardstock, right? And then this is just some sort of bottom layer that you want to, did you see that? Did I not put that in the camera? Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're never 100% sure. Now I've already got part of this cut. Is there enough white stuff here? Some of that cardstock's a little on the dirty side. Yeah, there might be enough here. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna cut off some of this other dirtier. And no, I'm not using a straight edge. I'm just giving it a cut, and I'll show you why. Okay. Now this paper, right, the cardstock is 8.5 by 11, so I know that in this particular case, it's going to cover the 9 on this paper. And how do I want the top? Well, I was going to say where I cut that other stuff. Would that do? No, it's a little too jagged. I wanted a little more rolling. So maybe I'll just cut this however you might like those little hills and or valleys to be, right? There, I like that a little bit better. Okay. And again, you decide whereabouts, you know, do you want the full, you know, part of the hill here? Do you want it lined up here? Do you want it somewhere, wherever you would like? And then at the bottom, you'll see that it's still longer. So once you decide where you're going to go, I'm just going to cut a little extra because I'm going to use that cardstock. Okay, so I'm just cutting a little beyond the edge there. Once you decide where that is going to go, and you're fully happy with it, how much of that space you want, you can glue it down. And then the trees. Now, these are not scientific trees. Here's how I did my trees. You can draw your trees out if you choose. I just went ahead and I took a scrap of the cardstock and thought, yeah, well, I'm kind of happy with the size of that tree in you know, regards to what's happening in the background here. And then, now where did I start from? I think at one point I may have started from the top here, and you'll see you see this crazy little offshoot here? I still used it, but yeah, I wasn't fully engaged with what was happening in my tree. So I'm going to cut out my little stem first. Okay, just 2 little, and then I'm going to cut a triangular piece into that stem, right, like that. Okay, and then, see, I've kind of already got myself into a bit of trouble here. I'm going to cut in sort of another triangle piece, but then, oh yeah, no, we're good. And again, I'm not worrying too much about how this is really, is it a perfect tree? Is it exactly evenly shaped on both sides? I'm not too worried. So yeah, it's a little lopsided, but it's cute. I'm happy with it. Now, if you want a little more variety, like this one side's got out really long, then you know what? You can always go ahead and, like, there's more branches on the other side again. Just take out a little piece, and then if you're, it's a danger. I agree that it's sort of, you're like, oh, I can start, you start cutting into things, and when do you stop? Well, yeah, that's a fine question. When indeed? Yeah. But that's okay. And then whatever sections you're like, well, that doesn't look right, you can just clip right off. See? Why not? And then you can make odd numbers again. Odd numbers, if you've ever heard in flower arranging, right? The odd numbers are the way to go. Then yes, do your odd numbers. And you can cut out some trees, and you can decide where they're going to go. And again, if you want to do your splatter before, that's fine. Do your splatter, then you can glue down your background. Add some trees, again, glue them down. Glue stick is fine, and if you want to use the other tacky glue, that's fine too. Even smearing it with your finger works. I just find that whatever glue you happen to use, when you're gluing something down again, in this case, right, just put a scrap piece of paper on over top of it, not newsprint, because you don't want you want a clean piece that's not going to, the color is going to shift. But this way you can push it down, and you could really smooth it down, making sure that there's lots of contact in it, right, so that it sticks. And you can also take some of your splatter, and you can make them into little stars with your paintbrush with the white paint. All right, now I've added words as well. Depending on, some might be taking their Advent study. So if you're doing, for those who dream, you might, this week would be prepare the way. For some that might be doing Advent conspiracy, maybe it's, more meaning. Maybe that's where you want it. Whatever words like peace and safe and gentler, from keywords from We Make the Road by Walking, whatever study you might be working on to help in that case as well, you can do that. If you are, I've done some of the words like messengers here, and grateful in metallic pen. And then I decided that these words were more, to help me focus, to put them on the snow, and to create again those ideas that there are hills, right? So following the imaginary hill line there. If you don't like how stark that might be, I didn't do it along the whole, but I wanted to show you a little piece of what happens. Yes. So on here, I have written the word peace. There was some watercolor on the watercolor paper, and then wrote the word peace. And then I just glued, just with a glue stick, I just ran the glue stick across it, crumpled up some tissue, and then smoothed it out, but not like perfectly smooth, but had some crumple. And you can see that it adds a little extra texture, but then it also diffuses the word a bit when you've done it in marker if it's too white for you. All right, so that's just a thought. If you can use the white tissue. All right, I think that at this point are our pieces. Oh, right. So there's the one with all the layers and all the various textures and things that you can do. And here's one that if you're feeling that you're in need currently of something a little more seasonal, I understand that. There is comfort in that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Then maybe this, or you could do them both. Maybe this could be the front side of a card that you send out to someone, because everybody needs us to reach out at this point this year. We'll recenter ourselves now before you get into your time of creating. So we'll do some breathing. If you can get your feet flat on the floor and your backs as straight as possible. And on your first deep breath in, think to yourself, may we see the peace of God. And on the way out, in all of creation. And again, on the way in, may we see the peace of God. And on the way out, in all people. May we see the peace of God in, and on the way out, in all the moments of our days. And one more time, may we live life peacefully. And on the way out, feeling your breath on purpose. And together we say, Creator God, quiet my mind before it passes judgment on this prayer, my gift of time to you. Amen. May you enjoy this process. May you find it relaxing. Stay as much in focus and much as in the moment as you can. Have that music playing. If you find your mind wandering, just bring it back. Use the word peace. Just say to yourself, peace. Bring your mind back into what it is that you're doing. Again, pay attention to how the brush moves on the paper, how the water shifts, how the color shifts in the water, how the paper feels when you're cutting it or when you're gluing it down. All of those things help you to be in the moment. It is about that intentionality, right? Your awareness, your attentiveness. And in that moment of these moments of being intentional, that we can prepare our hearts and our minds for the coming of Jesus. And in that, you will find your aliveness as well. Have a wonderful week.